Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
American soccer fans, welcome to episode 82 of the Stars and Stripes FC podcast. Donald Wine here, manager of Stars and Stripes FC, your source for all things U.S. national teams, the players that comprise them, and everything else surrounding the game of soccer in America. The U.S. women's national team roster has been released. It came out this morning as we record on Monday, August 22nd, ahead of friendlies next weekend in Kansas City and right here in Washington, D.C. And I want to discuss that on this show, but I could not do it alone because there's a lot to unpack from this roster. So I had to bring the squad back to discuss it with me. Joining us on this episode are Skye and Sylvs. They are the Shea Butter FC Podcast, part of the 2 Cents FC Network. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us and welcome back to the show.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
What's good?
It's good.
I was telling Donald, bold of you to have me on today. I'm making a lot of friends, so it's fine.
Look, you always got your back. So I always appreciate your perspective. It's exactly why when this roster came out, I was like, yeah, I need to have y'all back to discuss this. So before we talk about it, I should probably list the roster for everyone who has been under a rock today. Essentially, it's the same 23 player roster that we had for the Concacaf W Championship with just one omission. That's Emily Sonnet, who is recovering from injury. But to remind you and refresh everybody, the rest of the names on the roster we have at goalkeeper, Aubrey Kingsbury, Casey Murphy, and Alyssa Naeher. Our defenders, Alana Cook, Emily Fox, Naomi Girma, Sofia Huerta, Kelley O'Hara, and Becky Sauerbrunn. Only 6 defenders on this roster. Midfielders, 7 of them. Sam Coffey, Lindsey Horan, Taylor Kornieck, Rose Lavelle, Kristie Mewis, Ashley Sanchez, and Andi Sullivan. And your forwards, Ashley Hatch, Alex Morgan, Mallory Pugh, Midge Purse, Megan Rapinoe, Trinity Rodman, and Sophia Smith. Also in this camp, now there's 23 players also in this camp coming back to train. She will not be on the roster for matches, but in an effort to regain her fitness, the GOAT herself, Crystal Dunn, is back in camp. So we're glad to see her. So after hearing all that, so just initial thoughts, and I've seen some, we've been chatting most of the day about some of these things, but your initial thoughts when you saw this roster, the fact that it's mainly the same 23 we saw back in July.
It's probably not that shocking of a roster, right? I don't expect a lot of turnover in terms of a group of players that won a W coming into a friendly. In my mind, a friendly is the time to see other players, or like we were discussing earlier, at least bring in more than 23 because you bought in 24. The best news is Crystal Dunn is back training. I'm sure Blacko is ecstatic because she saves him a whole lot of the time. If he plays her at left back, I'm going to burn down U.S. soccer. And he probably will, because why wouldn't he? But I mean, it's fine. I'm glad Sam Coffey's here because we don't have a 6. Like, that's a very real thing. And she's the natural 6 that we have. I think Andi does fine as the 6. I also think Andi might be better as an 8. And we don't really have a ton of those either right now. So, I mean, it's fine. I think the roster is really the problem. I think how he answers questions about the roster tends to be the problem. And I absolutely understand chemistry, but he set the standard. He said it's about form first, and it has pivoted pretty consistently. I think in the past year and a half. And I don't think it's wrong for people to ask for consistency with selections. But having said that, like, I think this team will do fine against Nigeria. Is Assisat back yet?
I'm not sure, actually. Okay. I don't think they've released their roster yet. So
okay, so
I'm
we
sure
also
we'll find
don't
out
know.
next week.
I mean, but that's a pretty good Nigerian squad. Did they get to the semifinals of AFCON?
Yeah.
And that roster is good. And oh, by the way, their U20 team just went further than ours did. So they have talent coming through for that World Cup. That Nigerian team is not a pushover squad. And they have their injuries too. But I expect good things, particularly if they're in a favorable group next year. So it's probably a decent test. We played them in the past, year and a half. Mm-hmm. And I think the bigger thing is going to be the England game in October. But yeah, I mean, it's fine. I don't think there's a lot of surprises. I think there's one, maybe two really big omissions, but that's probably the case with every roster.
Yeah. And Skye, I think, doubling back to the actual roster, right? Like this roster is, the same roster that we had in the W, where Vlatko was kind of like, hey, this roster is not the roster that, or at least at this point, is not the one that we're expected to be ready for prime time being the World Cup next summer. But as we move forward, it sounds like he feels like he wants to kind of move with this group towards kind of this, establishing this as kind of the group. Do you think that should be the case? And if so, or if not, like, how do you want this next few months to go, especially when it seems like we're going to be playing a little bit more better competition?
Oh, I'm like confused so I'm confusion because he said this isn't the group. Well, rewind that. He said they're not ready for World Cup. And then I guess he kind of alluded to the group would not win a World Cup. But then, he said form was important. But if that is true, if you did keep most of your group, you'd have to make some interchanges because people ain't been in form in club play. So that's another problem. Multiple people on multiple lines haven't been in form, while other people have, over the course of them not being involved in any of the competitions, have solved a lot of the answers you need to be solved that people have struggled, either to score, either to play the non-spot, to be in the midfield, to, be on the back line as natural outside backs, to actually get more sixes, because you clearly don't have a six for whatever reason. And then I guess for the next few months, I figured he would pull the same group, but it's a freaking friendly. Like, what are you doing? You only got so many time for the rest of the year, and you only have so many more windows. So, I mean, the World Cup is next year. You have several people hurt. You literally got a whole starting lineup of people hurt. And so, in key positions. So, it's like, why are you not bringing more people in to see what they look like? Particularly as players have played really well in the NWSL and other leagues, like Liga Mekki Feminil, like Me Official. And then I guess the other thing is, like, yeah, you're going to England to go play, a harder friendly, so to speak. But, like, also that would be a good time because you're going international and playing an international. You're playing over in a jam-packed stadium that's going to be sold out. Like, it would be a good time to bring more people to see how they react and test them. But I don't know. I guess for the rest of the year, I would like to see him actually bring in players to try them out to see what they look like in different positions. To actually, use friendlies for their purpose. To actually act like to give me can I get consistency in a press conference where you're not coming off as asshole? And then more importantly, you're not being really critical, particularly, I'm gonna keep it real, towards Black players, and not having sound logic to any of these answers as to why people are admitted. Because it's where is AD French? Because she has outperformed two of the goalkeepers, honestly, all three goalkeepers in league.
We
then
talked about them.
Yeah, in the midfield, where are his explanation was, Lund and Fallon are two goalkeepers too, but you didn't invite them to camp. So it's and all three of them have been better than two of the goalkeepers you called in. Or if you're in the midfield, you are missing a six, you struggling for 8. Your Mewis is hurt, so and she's a very important presence. So if in the event she can't play in time, what are you doing to try to find her replacement? on the forward line, you still don't have consistency all over the place. And then some forwards ain't been up to snuff in club play. And you go sit here and explain to me, me official should not be in when she's doing the stuff you need your central forward to do. If you're playing a 4-3-3. For why, I don't know why we're doing this. But yeah, I guess for me, I just would like to see us using friendlies as friendlies and examining tactics, trying to increase. If you're saying this team can't, if you're saying whatever's happening with the team is not going to win the World Cup, like, okay, cool. You want to keep portion the pool together to try to build chemistry, but bring other people in. Because a lot of your issues, there are solutions, but you're not bringing them in, or they're hurt. So,
yeah. And I mean, for me, official, right? Like, I was going to get into her, but you guys kind of alluded to it as well. I asked in the press conference today, I was like, yo, the Spirit players, I love my Spirit, hometown team, defending champs, but they fired their coach in the middle of this press conference, basically. So, it would have been 7 players if Sonnet was healthy, but we have 6. And the team as a whole just hasn't been playing well. And he at first answered the question saying, yeah, well, they're not playing as well as they should be, but, I can count on them, and I'm going to bring them in because I think they're going to, kick it up a notch, and I want to evaluate them as they do that. And then the very next question, I asked him about me official, and she's already at a level that she's scoring goals on a consistent basis. And he goes, I haven't even really had a conversation with her, and I haven't, and I don't think that she is as good as some of the NWSL players. And that's where I think a lot of people online, I know you guys were in the thick of it as well, but like when that happened, basically everyone was like, then you haven't been watching her, because she's scored like 15 goals in the last 7 months for Tigres, and she's been arguably the most consistent forward anywhere, not just in North America, but anywhere. She's been one of those. She's been that real deal that we thought she would be when she signed with Tigres. And it led to kind of it exacerbated to a conversation about whether U.S. soccer feels that Liga MX Femenil is inferior to NWSL. And here's what I'm going to say. Yeah, it probably is, but that's not a reason to keep her off the team, right? Like if she's doing well, I don't care where they're playing. I want them in camp. I want them to get that evaluation process and make it fair, right? Like, because at the end of the day, we're going to need people who are on a roll. They're hot. And I don't care where they come from. And I don't think if we're going to a World Cup, if someone's scoring 80 goals a game out in China, bring them in, because they can score goals, right? So at the end of the day, I feel like me official's just not getting she's getting the raw deal because she's just not getting the right look. She's not getting an opportunity, because even if she's scoring goals, like you guys have said, he kind of moves the goalposts down the road.
How do you evaluate? How do you know? Like, my question to Blacko would be, how do you know if you don't bring her in to evaluate the talent? Like, you're giving opportunities. And again, I think the Spirit players are talented. They can clearly do it. But if you're basing it solely off of, well, they've already done it, so I know they can do it, while not giving anyone else another look or another chance,
and we've seen that too with Rapinoe making the W roster. He was like, yeah, I basically told her last summer that she's going to be on the team, and I just needed her to be healthy. Whereas other people like Kristen Press, he was like, well, she wasn't going to make this roster even before she got hurt. Like, it's a consistent issue.
It's a consistent issue. And I'm just like, again, this is the time to evaluate talent. I hear the people who are like, bring them to December camp, bring them to January camp. If we're already worried about time, why would you wait 3 and 4 more months to evaluate talent? Like, that doesn't make sense. We need to be building those partnerships now. And they're friendlies. This is the time to do it. And there's no consistency. I'm sorry. It's not a lack of competence when a coach says to you, by the way, a coach who has not talked to the player themselves. Me official probably found this out in the same press conference we found this out today.
Yeah.
Which is to say, oh, she has to be consistent for 15 games. Sofia Smith's our best forward right now. I have no problem saying that. I think she's the best player in the NWSL. I think she's one of the best players in the world. I absolutely think she got a raw deal on the Ballon d'Or list. And what makes me really sad is in that Grant Wall interview, she basically said, I know you're going to overlook me because you always overlook me, right? Doesn't keep her from being a menace, a goal scorer, whatever. But even then, like, you still had to give her a look, right? She consistently got called in last year, even though she didn't make the final Olympic squad. You don't know until you see it. And I don't know if I trust the evaluation ability of a man who played Cat Macario 7 minutes. Like, I have questions about how he evaluates talent in general. And I have said, listen, he's our coach through the World Cup, unless something catastrophic happens, right? But I don't think he was hired to transition this team. I don't think as a club coach, his strength has been working with young players. And props to Pino for like stepping into that role and mentoring the young players, knowing she may or may not go to the World Cup, right? Like, I don't think she knows. I really don't. But that's not her job.
Yeah,
that's why we have a coaching staff. That's why you're supposed to put people on that coaching staff who help those players transition. And I am all for chemistry, but this idea that all 23 people got to get along, all 23, like the Frenchmen's moms hate each other and they won the World Cup. Like, it doesn't have to be that, right?
As we talked about 2015 and 2019, the players were not fully cohesive, and players have spoken out. And I say players, I really mean one player.
Yeah, we all
has
know.
Spoken out. You all know, but has spoken about how tumultuous it was, and even some of the players on the team have said, hey, we kind of did it in spite of some players and coaches on the staff. Yeah. Like, we just kind of gelled together and did it because we knew we had to.
And I'm not saying that I want the environment to be like that. I don't.
Right.
But I do want to keep the environment where people have to fight for their spot.
Right.
Because if we're being really honest, however you feel about it, that's what's made us good, right? Like, that's what's made us us. And so I don't think we have to overcorrect. I think giving players their humanity is paramount. It's tantamount. And I'm completely willing to sacrifice a World Cup for it. But I think this is an overcorrect. And
I don't even think it's a correction, because like there was stuff that didn't make sense. Like, it's like purposeful. You're taking people that are hurt. I mean, I have several questions in terms of behaviors and things where I'm like, this is just playing in more to what's happening, where I've been like, what are you doing from a tactical standpoint? Because like, you have people hurt at the 6, you don't bring a 6, you bring one who's on one leg to the Olympics, and now, you haven't seen her play this year. Well, she got pregnant, but then you haven't seen Julie Ertz. In the back, in this year it was more egregious because you didn't have somebody to replace Emily Fox, in theory, if she got hurt. So she played through some knocks. You had 1-6 effectively until Ashley Hatch got hurt, and then you could bring in the other 6.
And still didn't play her, by the way.
And you didn't play her, and she is your 6-6. And so there's stuff where it's like, okay, so if you're gonna run a 4-3-3, and that's the other thing, because like if you're a really good coach, you don't necessarily have them run a 4-3-3, because your forwards in particular, most of them can play all over the front line and can drop. Well, a couple can drop into midfield, but to actually, finish chances, you probably want to do a different tactical formation. Like, it's like pick a struggle. Like, are you going to deploy certain tactics? Who are you playing? You're not playing Trinity Rodman. You're doing the same thing you did with Katerine Macario, where you're not playing her, and when you play her, she scores or assists. Like, and then you still have issues in midfield because Lindsey Horan is going to try to attack. That's not her ministry. She ain't trying to be a 6. And then even when it's like, and even for Taylor Kornieck, it's like, what? She's never had a real position in terms of midfield. So then if you're going to run a 4-3-3, how does that work? If you're not going to make changes, then how does that work? Like, everything's all over the place.
Taylor Kornieck is like KG in a way, where like her height has made it so difficult to judge where she is best on the field. And that's true. Coaches try to put her at different positions, not knowing what that answer is. And I don't even think she knows, because every time you ask her, she's kind of like, I just want to be around the ball, but I also don't want them to just use my height, right? Like, she says, I have skill, at the feet. Right. And I want to be able to show that. Yeah.
But when you have a team that's like struggling with identity and not have consistency, that's a problem.
Right.
Because when you go then play organized national teams and they hold a block, that's not going to help when you don't know where she's going. She don't know where she's going because you have you're struggling to teach players, younger players, how to go. Where with the veteran players, when he first came, they were able to get away with stuff because they played together.
Right.
So he just said, go forth and go prosper. they could go pivot and make stuff. They don't. The younger players that haven't had that opportunity don't know each other like that. And so it's I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, right? Because that he's actually been pretty consistent on about like he wants to play the system and it's like loosely structured and people can sort of play within it. And I'm like, you can practice that, but that's a system you create for veterans. That's not a system you create for young people. And I'm saying this across the board. This is not just about soccer. The younger they are, the more structure they need. And I'm not saying that because they're not talented. I'm not saying that because they can't figure out a system eventually. Some of them might, but that is not how you win a World Cup. That is not how you get young people through life. That's how you prepare them to go out into the real world. There's a reason we have structures in place to help young people. Like it's not that loosey-goosey where
until they figure it out.
Right. But they need more structure, not less in that regard, right? And I don't think tactically that aligns with shifting US soccer. We could say what we want about the men's team, right? They have a tactical structure. We don't always agree with it, right? And I think about the men in the sense that it took them not qualifying for it sort of to all be blown up, right? And for them to bring in the talent, regardless of what it looked like, regardless of where it played. And also, we all assume this is probably not the World Cup for them, right? Like they'll do well, but we're all eyeing 2026 because we understand you're probably going to have to play a World Cup in order to win World Cup. Mm-hmm. And so I get us bringing in, veterans. And honestly, most of my beef with the roster isn't with the veterans this time. I actually think they've been informed. Like that's not my beef. Even Pino, I'm fine with calling Pino in on form. But I think there's going to come a real point where we have to start asking those questions about form and chemistry. And my line has always been a third of your team needs to be veterans, a third of your team needs to be people in their prime, and a third of your team needs to be young players. Because that seems to roughly be the structure. England almost had that in the Euros, right? I would say they skewed maybe a smidge younger. But they had about that makeup, right? And it worked for them. Like it worked for them in ways it didn't work for other teams. And we're not at the place as US soccer anymore, and particularly on the women's side, where talent alone is going to do it. We don't have the talent we don't have enough talent to win in spite of anymore. Like that ship sailed in 2019.
So I want to stick with that, right? Like and we'll get to the tactics part in a second, but just like based on the roster selection or, picking of players, whatever you want to call it. I think you've talked about like right now, this is the time for us to kind of experiment, bring in some new players, see what they can do, give them a taste to see what it's like. I think, it goes without saying, I think Vlatko Andonovski is probably the most difficult job in soccer because he's going to have to narrow down a field of probably 50 players that are really good to 23, maybe 26. And the player's job is to make that the most difficult decision he ever has to make because everyone's in form, everyone's healthy, and everyone has a case for selection. And at the same time, his job is to make sure that they all have that exposure so that they all want to play and be in top form at the right time so that, again, his decision is difficult. He should be saying, oh, well, Pino's great, I'm just going to call her in, because that's kind of where we got into a rut, right? Especially when it comes to the 2016 Olympics, when we were just like, oh, we just bring Pino because she's Pino, but she was hurt. 2020, we try to bring Julie Ertz, same thing, and we don't bring him back because they just relied on the fact that they are who they are, superstars, and just assumed that they would be okay. My issue is that right now, this is where I want competition. I think there should be, if there's going to be 23 spots on the plane to Australia and New Zealand, there should be 23 open seats right now. Nobody should be cruising because you never know what's going to happen. And that's on top of, as you mentioned, the starting 11 that is already out due to injury or due to maternity leave, or, I don't know what Julie's doing. I don't think anyone knows what Julie's going to be doing, but like that sort of thing, right? Where this problem right now only becomes worse in 2023 when all those players come back. And now you have 35 players or 40 players who theoretically could and should be on a plane to the World Cup. So I think for Vlatko, he needs to make that clear. What are your standards? What do you need people to be living up to? And and be ready to say, hey, I don't care who you are. If Mia Hamm walks through that door and does not meet these standards, Mia Hamm is not on that plane. Heather O'Reilly might be the second, most informed player next year, but if she's not meeting those standards, she is not on this plane. Like those sort of things where fan favorites, no matter how you slice it, are going to be left home. But if you have these standards that are clear and unequivocal, then people will understand why you go with the team that you do.
Yep. I mean, I think you said that very succinctly. And I think that's where the confusion is, right? What is the standard? I don't know. I asked that last year before the Olympics. I'm like, what's the standard?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like what does Sophia Smith have to do? What does Mitch Purse have to do? And yes, they're being called up. But I don't know how much more informed Midge was then versus now. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The team has shifted, right? But in terms of her play, I don't think she's immensely better now than she was last year, right? And so I think that's the confusion, right? We're all guessing. And I understand not giving away, state secrets, so to speak, and tactics, but you can have a standard. You can say this is the standard, right? Wegman did that, right? She was like, hey, this is the standard. You have to play to this. And again, I could also argue she got away with some tactical things too.
Yes.
Playing Rachel Daly as outside back is a wild choice.
Yeah, don't not do that.
But I wouldn't do that in the World Cup.
Oh, I wish you would.
And I think Rachel
wish
Daly
would
should
do
make
that
the
in
squad,
October.
but that's not the move.
She probably will do it in October. She probably will.
I wish you would.
But there was also enough talent to cover, and there was also enough scoring talent. I guess I get it. I don't know if I was Alex Greenwood, I probably wouldn't. But okay, she also got away with it, right? She won the Euros, and she won a lot of the Euros because young players got to step up, but they were young players who got a look, even if their teams weren't necessarily great, because in 2020, they took all the old heads. They didn't get very far, right? So yeah, I think that balance is there, but even if you look at some of the other teams that did well, that balance is there. And this is the rest of the world. This ain't just Europe. I'm looking around. I'm looking at these U20s. I'm looking at all this stuff. We have the deepest pool, but we are not the most talented team.
Coming up after the break, more with Skye and Sylvs on the U.S. Women's National Team roster. This is the Stars and Stripes FC podcast. We are back on the Stars and Stripes FC podcast. Let's get back to that interview and hear more of what Skye and Sylvs have to say on the women's national team roster. I want to shift to the tactics part of things. And Skye, I'm going to bring you in for this because we were talking about kind of how Nigeria plays. And I think on the men's side, we were talking about their structure, Sylvs, and it was at a certain point, Greg Berhalter was calling in not the 23 best guys. He was calling in the 23 that he thought fit best within his system. And with the 4-3-3 that Vladka was running right now, it's hard to predict, right? That he's bringing in an Andi Sullivan to play a specific role in that offense, or to bring in a Taylor Kornieck to figure out where she's playing. So, Skye, when we're looking at Nigeria, a team that is, they have a lot of skill on the ball. They're very tenacious. They like to go right at teams. And we saw that during the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. What style should the U.S. be playing against them, especially if we're talking about trying to figure out how to play a team like that in the World Cup?
Well, don't fall into no double pivot block type thing where you effectively recognize that they're going to try to attack you. I mean, if they do what they did to Canada, even outside the African Cup of Nations, what they did to Canada, and how they beat Canada, 2-0 or something in the friendly. Understand that they're going to attack you, so you need to be able to, one, attack back, but then two, fix whatever's happening in your midfield. Because no matter what they run, whether they run a 4-3-3, 3-5-2, whatever, 5, whatever, and whatever they want to run for tactics, the biggest issue currently for the national team is whatever's happening in the midfield. Like the spacing is always off. People aren't in position, so it takes them all out of shape. And then you got to hope Alana Cook or Naomi Girma or whoever's back there can try to stop anything. I mean, potentially if everybody's healthy, you're talking about Iffy, you're talking about Ashwala, you're talking about, who else am I missing? You're talking about a whole front line. Jenna. Oh, snap. Shoot.
Or Dega. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about a whole stacked front line that will, this is a front line that'll run through what they're doing and attack them. And this time they don't have a Kristen Press and Lynn Williams to help, you know, on the other end, put mad pressure on them. Like, depending on what he's running, there's been times he's been running stuff where it's like, you knew they were going to attack you. Why are you running that? Where I don't know what he's going to do, but for what he's taken, I guess, at minimal, I would want to see some kind of formation where the midfield spacing is where it needs to be. If you're going to have Lindsey Horan out there, not as a 6, but as 8, 10, you know, is she working as a midfielder and not so far high up? And then how is everybody else if you're running a 4-3-3 and spacing in the midfield so you don't have all these crazy apps? And then for your forwards, like, how are we going about how they're attacking and connecting from front to back, you know, with the midfield? Because this could be a, you know, just vibes kind of situation. But I guess my biggest concern for them has been the midfield and then their lack of depth for the outside backs than anything. But then after that, it'd be scoring. I guess scoring will more so be an issue for the England match, because in theory, they would be stacked in a way where, they could shut them down. So then, and it's always been like that when we play England, like, who is going to score on them, you know? Unless they throw Rachel Daly back there. But
I think the England match will be, and again, this might not be the exact same lineup. So, you know, I guess he said, like, this isn't with an eye toward England, it's with an eye toward the World Cup, which, okay. But, right, England can clearly be had. Like, that defense isn't, to me, like a top 5 defense in the world, but it's a sound defense. I think speed bothers them, right? But they also have found their 6. And that 2019 front line, and that ain't the 2020 front line we're talking about. Like, the Tunes, the Kelleys, the Hemps, Russo's a menace. Like, she terrorized the NWSL. Like, we're not going to defend that for 90, right? And you're asking a lot of Cook and Girma, right? Who I think can cover almost anything. And I think if that back line is healthy, it's those two. It's Fox and it's Huerta. And probably a little bit of prayer, right? Because those backs attack. And I think that game will tell a tale. Like, I think if we have a bad showing in that game, some narratives will change. Like, I think we could talk a good game. But I think even if we lose that game, or particularly if we lose that game, like, say we lost to Sweden, I think it's a different conversation, because I think some things will be laid bare. I'm not so sure we win that game. Like, I'm not so sure we win that game. Having said that, you have Sofia Smith and Trinity Rodman. You are in any game. And so I get
Trinity, you got to play her.
That's also true, and not as a 9, please. That's not where she's best. It's not where she's best. And again, I get that players are adaptable, but I really think this man thinks everyone's Crystal Dunn. They're not. Like, the reason Crystal Dunn is Crystal Dunn. And again, super excited that she is back to training. If this man plays her at a left back, I'm absolutely going to riot. Like, I'm very tired. We have left backs. I
think that's the plan, right? Or not the plan, but that would be the ideal situation, right? That Emily Fox has played. I think she's played extremely well enough that we can let Crystal be free along with Midge. There's a reason why Midge hasn't been featuring at, right back recently, is because we've had people come along that have made it where she's able to push up and able to take more space and do what she does best.
But okay, so my question would be, and again, I'll wait till it happens. What is the indication that he will? Right? Because Emily Fox still needs a backup.
Right.
Yep. He's not calling in any other left backs. And particularly with the oh, I have a left back now, I can ease Crystal Dunn back in, right? Crystal Dunn, who does not play left back for club like ever, regardless of where she's played.
Ironically, when Emily Fox was out due to COVID for that one game in the W, the left back that game was Emily Sonnet, who was not on this roster, and also
shouldn't be an outside back.
But should not be an outside back.
No.
Right. And I don't know, maybe he's hopeful that when Tierna gets back, because in theory Tierna can play left back. Like I don't know, but I don't think he's gonna play Crystal in the midfield. I really don't.
Although that was some player.
And he's not gonna put her on the forward line, even though she wants to be in the midfield or be on the forward line.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter where you play.
And she's your best midfielder. If you play her.
Right now, yeah. Yeah.
She's your best player wherever you put her, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I think is the gift and the curse, right? Because I think he very much limits where he plays her, right? So you have this utility player, but you don't utilize that utility.
Right.
You rarely play her anywhere else.
The worst, I feel like the only bad thing that Crystal Dunn has ever done is become a top 3 left back in the world.
Yeah. She was good at her worst position, right?
Yeah.
And so she's sort of stuck there now. And I think, again, I think every spot should be open, but yeah, if Crystal Dunn's in form, she's going, right? Like, there's not another her anywhere. But it's just, I just think now's the time to see. Like, I don't get waiting. If you're truly waiting to experiment and see and evaluate talent and do all of these things, I don't get waiting. Even if they don't stick, right? You might see them as, in September and be like, nah, it's probably not going to work. That's fine. But to write people off without ever seeing them within the team setting, when, again, friendly windows are the time to do that, it's just weird to me.
I mean, I would look at how many people you can, because, I mean, you got people getting injured left and right. So what's going to happen when your little established team, people start getting hurt because they've been playing too much soccer? Because, again, this is how you've lost the whole starting lineup of people because they played too much during the Olympics into the Challenge Cup situation, just period.
But
so, yeah.
Even
they basically didn't have a break for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. But looking at world football, even, look at all the stars who've gone down. Right. Some of them didn't even play in the Olympics, right? Like, it doesn't matter. This idea that health is guaranteed, never mind, we're still living through pandemics, right? You don't know. And so I certainly wouldn't write people off. And I certainly wouldn't keep myself from calling people in just to see what it looks like. There's no harm in calling them in. There's no harm in calling in more than 23 people. You don't have to dress everybody. But at least let them be in the environment. At least let them train. At least let them try. Some people might surprise you. And there's always a late ad, right? There's always a Jessica McDonald and an Ali Long. Like, there's always people who come out of nowhere the year of the World Cup. And sometimes it's out in this, or people who come back, right? Allie Krieger was gone for 2 years, and then we kind of had to grovel and ask her about, right? Like, that happens. And I just don't get the logic of shutting off your possibilities. And again, I know people, get angry, defend their favorites, yada, yada. Like, I'm perfectly fine with people who I admire as players not making it. But they got a right to fight for their spot, just like young players have a right to fight for a spot. Like, and if we're automatically guaranteeing spots, that's a spot they don't get to fight for. And that's just, to me, that's not how you build the best team. Like, that's a lot of assuming. It's just a lot of assuming without seeing and just writing people off. And if you're transitioning young players, to not even talk to a young player on the phone and be like, hey, this is what I'm looking for. Right? Like, for her to find out at a press conference, that's messed up. That's not good coaching. Like, that's not good coaching at all. That's not good. That's not being a good adult to a young person.
I just would have thought, like, there would have been at least a conversation of, hey, you're, keep your head down, keep working, and we're watching you. Like, it doesn't have to be elaborate, but just a quick call to say, like, you're on the radar. You're not on the team, but you're on the radar. We're still watching you. And even if it's, BS, but, like, make the call. Like, that's, right. I think that's what blew everyone's mind. Is not necessarily that she was not called in. It was that there's been no conversation with her about what it is she needs to do to get to that next level. And I hate that my question It's probably how she found out what that standard is, at least for her, because
Right.
it's different for everybody.
Right. It's also not the standard for everybody else.
Yeah, which is wild. Like, what?
I'm like, what? Like, I would have, had I been on the conference, I would have been like, can you explain why it's 15 games in a row? And I would have asked him to tell me any other player who's had 15 really good games in a row.
Mm-hmm.
Be critics.
Right? Like, that's incredibly arbitrary. And I think he trips over himself because I don't know if he trusts all his decisions. Like, I really don't. And I don't know if he's the one making all of the decisions. Like, we know how U.S. soccer works. Yeah, I know we're on a podcast about U.S. soccer, but like, we know how this organization works. It's not a secret. And so I don't know how much is his say. I don't know how much is the Federation's say. I don't know what the game plan is. I don't know what the marketing game plan is. And all of the bias and the bigotry and everything else doesn't go away just because we called in more Black players. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
Having a Black best friend doesn't make you not racist, right? Having a Black kid doesn't not make you racist. Slavery. Like, all of it. And so, yeah, I'm just really, the talent is there, but I don't think we're handling most of this very well. And I am concerned because I don't think the system's changed. And I feel, my fear is like, it's going to be like the England men's team, right? Where who caught all the abuse? Who caught all the hell?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They loved them until they didn't. They loved them until they didn't fit into their idea of what a Black player should be. They loved them until they made a mistake. And America's not built differently. Like, we're not. And so I know who's going to catch the brunt of this if we don't get this done. I know who's going to catch it.
You mentioned the England game is kind of like a time where narratives will change. I think, honestly, the reason why those narratives will change is because it's England, right? Like, as a soccer nation, we always are comparing ourselves to England in everything that we do, even if we're better than them at a particular facet of the game. We're always comparing us. Then we're comparing MLS to the EPL all the way up to the national teams. So let's consider that the test, right? The first test in a series of many leading up to the World Cup. What do we have to do against Nigeria in these two games to show that we're ready for that test?
Who, the team or the coach?
Yes.
Well, first you have to
take it and roll.
Well, first you have to deploy tactics that make sense. Because England's not going to sit back either. So, how are you going to deal with the attacking? I guess I would want to see scoring where it's not hard for them to score. Because for all they won. So what? I mean, yes, they won. They qualified for the World Cup, but it was uncomfortable. And honestly, had Mexico not imploded on itself, and Jamaica had enough, there was a lot of things going on behind the scenes that if they had the support, and if the draw was different, we played Jamaica first.
Yeah.
Or Haiti's not with a bunch of 18-year-olds. Like, that's a really different situation. We don't necessarily coast through. If Canada plays, if Deanna Rose is healthy, that's probably a different game. So, yes, we qualified, but how we won wasn't comfortable. Because, again, we could have lost to Mexico for all their turmoil, which they would have messed around and then, in theory, would have been able to get into the bracket to qualify.
Right.
I want to see this team actually have play soccer and not be hard. Actually score smoothly. If Sofia Smith is open, she has freedom to score. People not trying to set people up. I don't want to have to see Midge come and just snatch something. She's taking something to go home to prove that you got to keep me on this roster. I want there to be 11 players playing together as a team, not in spades of, dysfunction. But tactically, I want to see stuff that makes logical sense. And then play all your players. Like, play Trinity Rodman. Play whoever. Play Sam Coffey.
Yeah. So I think England will be interesting, right? Because I think for Euros, they basically ran a 4-2. And then I don't know if we call it a 4-3-3, but that front was almost a diamond. So you would drop Kirby back. The now retired Ellen White would be up front. And then you had Hempo and it
rotated too.
Yeah, and they rotated it and they would change that formation with subs sometimes, right? But you had those two wingers. Yeah, and then you had that striker up top, who I now will presume is going to be Alyssa Russo, which is a very different tactical charge than defending Ellen White. Like, it just is, right? And then I don't know if Kirby plays that role. I don't know if like Ella Toon drops like a certain spot and sort of drops into that role, whatever that sort of playmaking role.
And Ebony Salmon.
Right, and there's now a spot open too, right? So do they call up Ebony Salmon in October, who plays against Americans for the most part, right? It does really well. Like, it's not like Ebony Salmon can't play against defenders, right? She's beaten that back line, right? The majority of the people on that back line. So yeah, I don't know. I think what England's formation is going to force us to do is score off of possession versus hitting on the counter. Like, I still think we'll have space to do that. But with that four and then those two, that Stanway and Walsh, right? Walsh back a little bit deeper, Stanway sort of roaming, but like, it's going to force us to break it down. And who are our players that are going to do that, right? Like, I don't think that's our best soccer, right? Our best soccer is not possession. We're not Spain, right? Like, we're not going to work, or even Germany. We're not going to work through you and break you down, right? You don't have Sophia Smith and Mallory Pugh to break down the defense. You have them to run, not that they can't possess, but that's not our game. And so I do think England's going to set up in a way that's going to force us to have to try that. And it's going to be really interesting because I don't think that's our strength. And I don't think we have the players healthy right now.
Yep.
That are going to allow us to do that. Like, I think if Kat Macario's healthy, it probably looks a little different because she on her own can break that down, right? But
Kat and Crystal, like, out, on one side, just
and maybe we have Crystal Dunn back,
lives.
Right? Like, maybe that is where you're like, oh God, Crystal Dunn, save us, right? But it shouldn't be on Crystal Dunn at this point, right? Like, that's why we're supposed to bring in the young players. It's not supposed to be on Crystal Dunn to save us. It's not supposed to be on Healthy Sam Mewis to save us anymore. Like, it's supposed to be a total team effort. And that England team is riding high right now. Like, they have no fear. They have no fear. Those young players don't know losing. They don't have that English doom and gloom. They're the ones who broke the curse, right? They are playing with house money and they're playing at home. And so I think it's a good test. But I think maybe against Nigeria, who's not going to play us like that, you're going to have to learn to play possession football a little bit. Like, you're going to have to use that time to work against that, work at that coming at you. Because Nigeria really is going to sit back against us, even if that would be quote unquote the correct way to do it. But I think we got to at least try to start learning how to break down with possession because it's not our strength. It's not our strength.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question I have before we get you out of here is, and it's kind of an unfair question, I admit, but I'd like you both to pick one player that you hope will step up in this camp the most, right? Like, it can be a star player just rising to the occasion. It could be someone that you think is, borderline should not be on the team, taking a major step towards saying, hey, making himself important throughout this window. Who's the one player that you think, I need this player to step up in this camp with these two Nigeria friendlies?
If they get played?
And assume that they will play minutes.
Then it's two.
In this room.
I got two, actually. So, Sofia Huerta, so we cut this nonsense out. So she starts. So that's secure. It's her position. She's the starting right back. Because I don't want I didn't know. That needs to belong to her for my sanity if I'm going to be watching this team from here on out. The other would be Trinity Rodman, so we can stop this nonsense of not playing her. So I don't have to hear she's not ready, so on and so forth, blah, 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 blah. You gonna need to play her. She will figure it out. She has figured it out. She scored and assisted. I don't need this foolishness. Like them two, that would be nice.
For me, I think it's you gotta prove to me why you got called up camp. And listen, I know she won the Golden Boot last year, but at this point, with the amount of attacking talent that we have, Ashley Ash going to have to prove it to me. Like, this is completely based off last year at this point. She didn't score at the W either. Like, and I'm not saying she didn't create chances and everything else, but I also think it's an incredibly beneficial place to be. And let me preface this by saying she absolutely adapted her game to be able to play well with the Spirit. Like, this is not people can't change, people can't get better. I absolutely think she's improved. But at this point, there's a lot of really good forwards. And I don't think she's better than some of the people she got called, at least in current form, than she got called ahead of. And so that's Flacco, for whatever reason, right, fairly or not, saying, hey, I'm putting my faith in you, show and prove. I don't think that's an unfair ask. And I think if she doesn't show, I don't think she's in England in October. Like, I don't. And that's the reality. I'm also very salty. Did we ever have a chance at Ordonez? Because I feel like we should have tried harder there.
It's hard to say, especially on the women's side, because there's just so, back then it was just like if you're a aspiring dual national, you could look up at Mexico and see a lot of opportunity, and you look at the national U.S. team at that point, you're just like, they're locked in for the next decade. Like, where's my role? But yeah, I think I was going to pick Ashley Hatch specifically for that reason, right? Like, she scored a lot of goals and she hasn't recently, and she needs to show that. I think that's where there's the most level of talent that can replace somebody, right? Like, I think there's a ton of midfielders, but I think, when it comes to the stars, very few are going to try and replace them. They may try to get on the team with them, but not replace them. Ashley Hatch is very, and again, Spirit, she's my girl, but she is very much replaceable if she cannot continue the torrid pace of scoring that she did last year. And I get it. Like, even on the national team, you can be, terrible for your club team and come on the national team and ball out. That's what she needs to do, though, because at this point, that's all we have to go on from a fan standpoint. Even Vlatko, from a coaching standpoint, it has to be like, hey, at a certain point, do you ride the faith bus and see how it takes you? Or do you say, hey, look, again, against England, we can't bring someone who's not going to score. We need people in this camp. Where 10 people are on the field and all 10 of them have the capability of scoring.
We can't take more than one traditional 9. That's not the way soccer works right now. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, we can't. Yeah. We don't have it, right? You're not going to win a World Cup that way right now. Okay. That's the way the sport works, men's and women's, right? Like, it's just not how the sport works right now. You are watching 9s who can play everywhere. Yeah. I watched Bunny Shaw drop back deep and pass balls, right? Yeah. And she is it for, like, not that Jamaica does not have other talent. They absolutely do, by the way. But, like, everybody knows Bunny Shaw's getting the ball. Like, it's not a secret. She's one of the best strikers in the world, right? And there's very few teams that have that. Like, there's very few teams. Alex Morgan is a dying breed. Like, and I know she quote unquote plays out wider for San Diego. I would argue she runs post to post, and that's fine. It works for her team. She's got 12 goals, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not the way football is played, mostly for country, but even club at this point. And so, I think we're gonna have to find some answers there. And yes, Hatch can playmake, but is she the best playmaking 9 we have? And with the assumption that, as somebody said, if Kat Macario can walk, she's probably going. If for no other reason than, like, popular demand and bullying. But, like, that's not how she plays the 9, right? And in many, many ways, we started building around Kat Macario and that front 3 of Macario and Pugh and Smith. Like, that's the ideal front 3 with that level of movement. And yes, we've had to adjust Kat Tor ACL. Like, we get that, but I don't think there's room for more than one traditional forward or 9, I should say. And I don't know if that 9 starts every game. Like, even in form, like, I just don't think every matchup dictates Alex Morgan starts.
Even that option should be there, right?
Right, the option should be there, but it's an option.
You call your number,
right?
You come in and score a goal.
Right, but it's just not the way football works. Like, this is not a traditional 9.
But even it's getting exploited, like, because even I've witnessed in games where if you are a 9 and you can't go up and down the wing comfortably, then they exploit that to effectively disrupt them trying to attack. And so I've seen that happen with Alex, seen it happen with Ashley, and happened during the championship. So that's kind of low key like a liability if you can't comfortably move on to other positions similar. If the wing is not your ministry, cool, then you need to have midfield dribbling ability. You need to be able to drop back then to service people.
Right. Like a bunny shaw, you need to be able to get that. You need to be decent on the ball. It's even my thing with Katoto. Like, I'm like, the evolution of her game is she's going to have to play out wider, or she's going to have to be better on the ball, or she's going to have to learn to shoot from distance. And I think that's the best 9 in the world. Like, because you can't stop. Like, again, you know the ball's coming, turn. There's nothing you can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Or pop in the Euros or something like that. But again, those are rare players at this point, right? Like, the traditional 9 for the most part doesn't exist. And so people have got to adapt. Like, we're there now. Having said that, please don't play Trinity Rodman as a 9. I just think she's more dangerous out wide. If you really want to make it work, then make her a left winger. Like, we actually don't have a ton of depth at the left. All of our talent's on the right side. Like, we overcompensated. All of our talent was on the left side in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. I mean,
there is talent on the left side.
But again,
she's not
to me, that's not happening, right? So you need a backup to Mallory Pugh. You need somebody who's good on the ball. You need somebody who can do that. And I love Pino, but she's not going to be a year younger next year. And we're presuming health. And I know they'll do everything they can to keep her healthy. But Father Time is always marching. And I, again, think she should be called up this window. She's been very good, the past month and a half since the last break. But like, are we taking her to the World Cup? Like, this is a very real question, right? Are we taking Becky? Are we taking Kelley? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Presuming Alex stays in form, are we taking Alex? Like, we ask those questions, right? And then I think we're allowed to push back. It's 2022, not 2023, right? Like, the form of now doesn't inherently matter in 2023. And so, yeah, I think if we're having an eye to 2023, again, not looking at more players doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And I think you work on chemistry starting in 2023. Like, I think that January, February She Believes Cup window is when you really start to nail that down. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're not. I mean, right now, the point is, some of these players that you're talking about that may not go to the World Cup is not because we don't love them. It's because we do. Mm-hmm. And we kind of want, like, I don't want Megan to just walk onto the plane. I want her to be challenged and win that spot out over, someone else. So right. Again, if someone's not as good as her, then great. Then she's battle tested. She's ready. And I think for all these spots on the plane to the World Cup, we want all of them to be battle tested and ready. And where it just wasn't given to them or handed to them. They had to earn it on the field. They had to earn it through their form and through their play. And they may have, in some of these places, they may only have to fight, 1 or 2 people. Like Emmy Fox may only have to fight 1 or 2 people to be on this plane. The 9, you may have to fight 20, but that fight you must, right? Everyone should be fighting to make sure that when they get on that plane, they go, hey, ain't nobody beating us because I just already beat the best team in the world, and that is the other 23 players in America who didn't make the trip.
Right, like, I think Krieger caught hell for that, but she was like, the second best team is probably our bench, like, because she knows what those practices were like. Mm-hmm. And like, those practices are real. Those practices are raw. Like, I remember talking to a former Stanford player, and they was like, "Yeah, we beat everybody because have you been to our practices?" Like,
right.
It's all the best players in soccer in college playing against each other in the practice every day. They killed each other, right? I imagine it's the same for the other big programs, UNC's, UCLA's, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with that. And I push back against the idea that somehow meritocracy doesn't break chemistry. Right? I just think we're not used to meritocracy.
Right.
I think we're not used to meritocracy. I think we don't think it's possible. And that's not just soccer. The world is set up like that's what isms are. It privileges a group of people. It's not about meritocracy. It's an advantage, right? And so yeah, I just want to make sure people are playing for those spots, right? Like I just that's sort of my big concern. And again, I know that there was toxicity around that as well, and the pressure to win, particularly when we're doing, fighting for equal pay and all this other stuff. But that competition shouldn't go away, right? Like, I don't think that was the bad part. I'm more concerned about like our fitness and not having Dawn, and like we broke Julie Ertz, so I'm very scared we broke Sam Mewis, and we might break Lindsey Horan. Like, that's the stuff I'm worried about. And like, I don't think we learned our lessons. I think we're perfectly okay with breaking bodies, just not all of them, and whose bodies we're willing to break. So yeah, I don't know. That's my soliloquy.
Well, I definitely appreciate it. I appreciate both of you for coming on. Before we wrap up, tell the people where they can find all of your work. Sylvia, I know you just joined up with Yogi over at Can I Kick It as well, in addition to this podcast. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm excited to be joining Can I Kick It. Obviously, we'll be getting into some of the, big stories, historical stories about football later in the fall and into the winter. So off season is our time. But I'm really excited to tell some of the stories about women's soccer. I think particularly Black players and moments and teams within the game that I don't think a lot of people pay attention to, be that stateside, be that on the African continent, and just trying to highlight those stories, because I think, part of this discourse is around people just don't know Black people who play soccer or who are very good at playing soccer, and particularly on the women's soccer side. It's never thought of collectively. And ultimately our goal is, soccer is for everybody. And so I'm just using another vehicle to do that. So part of our Cultureverse, and really excited to be with the homie Yogi, 804 all day. So yeah.
Awesome. Skye, where they can find you?
Skye Football. Well, Skye 5 Football on Twitter. And then Shea Butter FC.com. And then we have a Patreon.
Yes.
So Shea Butter FC on Patreon.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I guess I should get my individual handle. It's at Southern Sylvs on Twitter. Have fun. I had a lot to say today. So again, probably didn't make a lot of friends, but that's fine.
You have a lot to say every day. Today was just a little more amped because
sometimes
of things that happen. So, but yeah,
I'm very tired most of the time.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And you can find them both on Twitter, the podcast at SBFC_podcast. Give them a follow. The great people, and follow the podcast. It's really one of the best ones out there to listen to, because again, their perspective is so unique and it's awesome to hear, and it's honestly very refreshing, which is why I love having you guys on the show. So again, thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it, and taking the time out on your Monday night.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And that will do it for episode 82 of the Stars and Stripes FC podcast. Again, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you like what you're hearing, subscribe, rate, review this podcast. Eternally grateful if you do that. 5-star ratings and reviews are especially appreciated. Continue to send your questions and topic suggestions to me, ssfcpodcast@gmail.com. We will answer them as they come in. Enjoy the rest of your week, and until next time, take care.